Hey, this is Coach Latham. We're going to continue our review for the SOL Algebra 1 test, and in this segment, we're going to talk about equations. Also some inequalities. We're going to find the solutions, the roots, and the zeros. So let's go ahead and get at it. The first thing I want to do is take a look at this equation. I know all of you can solve equations, so I picked about the hardest one I could come up with. And if you had the time and you wanted to work it out, you could do this equation the hard way. The first thing we would do is distribute the 4. We would combine like terms. We would get all of our x's on one side. And then we would finally solve the two-step equation at the end by adding 8 and dividing by 27. And we would get the answer equals 7. Some of you still prefer to do it this way, but I would recommend that we just start doing them the easy way, which is solving the equations by graphing. When you do it that way, all you have to do is set the equation equal to 0. You're going to move these terms over on the other side until you're left with nothing on the right, thus it's equal to 0. So if it's negative 3x on this side, it becomes 3x on the other side of the equal sign. If it's 181 on this side, it becomes negative 181 on this side. So then you just type this into your calculator and graph it. We've already done the graphing section, so that should be no problem. And we see where the line crosses the x-axis. You can see that this line is going to cross the x-axis at 7. And to me, that's a lot easier than what we did on the previous page to get to 7. So now you can just solve them by graphing. So if we're going to go with the graphing route, we take a look at this next one. And the question that often shows up on the SOL test is how many solutions does the graphed linear equation have? What they're really asking us is how many times does the line cross the x-axis? The answer to this one is going to be 1 time. It crosses the x-axis right at that point. And so we know the answer. They could ask you what's the solution to this equation, and it's right there where it crosses the x-axis. So the solution to this equation would be negative 4, or B. All right, I've got some quadratic equations right here, and we could do the same thing. We could solve all of these the hard way. You should have already seen the section on polynomials where you learned how to factor. We've got all 3 types of factoring here. We've got a trinomial, we've got a greatest common factor, and we've got the difference of 2 squares. And I've mapped out how we solve each of those equations by factoring. The first step is always to set the equation equal to 0. So here we move the negative 10 to the other side and it becomes positive 10. And this one, it was already equal to 0. So you just go ahead and factor. And in this one, we move the 16 to the other side where it becomes minus 16. And then we factor the difference of 2 squares. I would never ever do this unless I really had to. It's much easier to graph them. You can simply graph these equations after you set them equal to 0 on your graphing calculator. And the answers will be where the curves cross the x-axis. So, if my graph ended up looking like this, how many solutions does the graphed equation have? Well, it crosses the x-axis here, and it crosses the x-axis here. So this equation has 2 solutions. If you're ever asked to find the solutions to the equation, you would just simply tell where are the 2 points that they cross the x-axis. One of the answers is negative 4. And the other answer is 5. We can do the same thing for this one. You're asked to tell how many solutions this quadratic equation has. Since it only touches the x-axis once right here, this quadratic equation has 1 solution. If you're asked to tell what the solution is, then you have to read the number on the x-axis where it touches it. It touches the x-axis at 4, so the solution to that equation is 4. And here's one that's a little bit tricky. They'll occasionally put one of these on your SOL test. They'll say, how many solutions does this one have? Since it never crosses the x-axis, it has no solutions, 0 solutions for that one. That doesn't mean the answer is 0. It means there are no solutions. All right, systems. If you have 2 lines or curves or inequalities that interact with each other, then that is called a system. A system of equations is the one that we work with most of the time. Right here, I have 2 different lines graphed on the same coordinate system. And whenever you have a system of equations, what you're looking for is the point at which those two lines intersect. So now our question is, how many solutions does the graph system of equations have? We're not looking for how many times they cross the x-axis. We're looking for how many times they cross each other. The answer to this one is going to be 0. These two lines never touch each other, and the reason why is that they're parallel lines. You can see they both have slopes of 2/3. So since they're heading in the exact same direction, but they started at different places, they'll never meet up with each other. You could have this system of equations and be asked, how many solutions does it have? Well, we've got two lines and they cross each other at exactly one point. So there's one solution to this system. If you're ever asked to give the solution, then it's the point where the two lines cross. So you need to remember how to do your XY the right way. This point of intersection right here is the point 4, 1. You go over 4, up 1. That's where the two lines cross each other. So that's the solution to the system. This one looks kind of funny, but they always put it on the SOL test. We've got one line that is lying right on top of the other. They ask how many solutions they have in common. Since the two lines are the same, there's an infinite number of solutions. This line's touching the other line here, 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 anywhere you could say. And it's because those two lines are actually the same line. If you rewrite the second equation from standard form into slope-intercept form, you'll see that you end up with a match of the first equation. Both of these equations are y equals 2/3 x plus 3. It's just that the second one was written in standard form. You can solve the system of equations by graphing. What I'd like for you to do now is to go ahead and hit pause and then type both of these equations into your graphing calculator and figure out where they cross each other. Okay, we're back. Your graph should look something like this. These are where the two lines cross right at this point. If you hit trace, you should be able to come up that the answer is -1, 3. -1, 3 is the answer to this system of equations. Here's a quadratic equation. I'd like for you to go ahead and hit pause again, graph this on your calculator, and find out what the two answers are. So go ahead and hit pause and try it out. All right, we're back. When you graph it on your graphing calculator, you're going to get a curve that looks just like this, only yours will look better than this. That one's hand-drawn. And the answers are where the curve crosses the x-axis. So it's where y equals 0. Your two answers are going to be at -2 and 3. So those are the solutions to that quadratic equation. All right, so here's some weird questions that they ask you on the SOL test. One of them is that they'll give you a quadratic equation and they'll say that it is factored for you. They want to know how many solutions there are. Well, you could go ahead and do what we've done before and graph this top part, and you'll see that there are two solutions. But what they want you to notice is that this factor and this factor are not the same thing. Therefore, you're going to have two different solutions. One of the solutions is going to be whatever makes the first part equal to 0. It's going to be -3 because -3 plus 3 is 0. And the other solution is going to be whatever number makes the second part 0. It's going to be -2 because -2 plus 2 is 0. So this will have two solutions, and the two solutions will be -3 and -2. Here's the same type of problem again. How many solutions does it have? You might already know by looking at it that this one is only going to have one solution. It's only going to have one solution because both of these answers are going to be the exact same thing. When you set x minus 3 equal to 0, you get an answer of x is 3. So that's the only solution. This is that parabola that was sitting right on top of the x-axis and only touches it once. Here's another one to look at. We do it the exact same way. We've got this part times this part is equal to 0. So since this x is different than x plus 5, this one's going to have two solutions. One of them is going to be where x equals 0, and the other one's going to be where x is equal to -5. because that's what you get when you break it into parts and set it equal to 0. Now they want you to work it backwards a couple of times. They'll say, what could be the factors of the quadratic equation if you know the answers? So they tell you the answers are -3 and 5, and they want to know what the factors are. They really want you to pick A. That's their real good wrong answer to try and trick you. But remember, the factors are the numbers that make the pieces or the factors equal to 0. I said that wrong. The answers are the numbers that make the factors equal to 0. So -3 has to make something equal to 0. It makes this one equal to 0. 5 has to make some part equal to 0. It makes this part equal to 0. So the answer is C, because -3 and 5 make the parts equal to 0. Take a look at this one right here. We have another problem. We've got to figure out which factors does 0, -3 make equal to zeros. So it's going to be the bottom one. When we put 0 in place of that x, we get a 0. And when we put -3 in place of this x, we get a 0. And finally, they'll give you a graph, and they'll ask you to figure out what the factors are based on the graph. So you have to do two things. The first thing you do is figure out the answers. The answers are -5 and 3. So we need to figure out which one of these sets of factors, -5 and 3, make into zeros. And it's going to be this top one, because 3 minus 3 is 0, and -5 plus 5 are 0. I've got one more just to make sure that you know how to do it. The answers to this equation are 0 and 3, where the graph crosses the x-axis, and you look for the one over here that 0 and 3 works for. 0 and 3 is going to work for B. 5 times 0 is 0, and 3 minus 3 is 0. That's everything you need to know on the SOL test in terms of solving linear and quadratic equations. Remember to go back to the beginning, hit pause, turn the volume down, and see if you can answer all the questions on your own. Good luck in studying. See you soon.